So as we reach the end of this section, let's quickly review all the terminology around classes. Because there is so much different stuff going on, so a lot of different features that you can use. And since classes are probably the way you're gonna implement OOP by yourself, it's always good to have a nice overview of everything that we can do with them. So here we have a huge class which essentially contains all the features that we studied over the last couple of lectures. So this is how we define a class, and in this case it is actually a child class. So student is a child class of the parent class person, and that is because here we are using the extends keyword to set up the inheritance between these two classes. And remember that the extends keyword will also automatically set up the prototype chain for us, so we don't have to do anything manually. Next up, this is how we define a public field. So this is what we did in a very recent lecture. And so remember that a public field is very similar to just a property that we defined in the constructor. So it is available on every created object. So on every instance created by this class. Then, of course, we also have private fields, and they are almost the same as public fields, but they are not accessible outside of the class. And so therefore, this is perfect for implementing data privacy and encapsulation. We also have static public fields, and so these are fields, or like properties, that are available only on the class. And I didn't show them to you in the code, so in one of the lectures, but this is how we can implement them. So just like static methods, we use the static keyword to make any field static as well. Then here, this is the constructor method, and it is automatically called by the new operator whenever we create a new instance of the class. So basically a new object. And this constructor method is mandatory in any regular class, but it might be omitted in a child class if we wanted to have the exact same number and the exact same name of parameters. Then inside of the constructor, there is the call to the parent class, and so that is the super class. And this, of course, is only necessary whenever we are writing a child class. So when we're using the extend keyword. And remember that this one needs to happen before we can access the this keyword in the constructor. Then here we have an instance property. And so just like public fields, the property is also available on each created object. But the difference between this one and the public field is that we set these instance properties based on input data of the constructor. So basically, these properties are more personalized and unique for each object, while the fields are usually for something that is common to all the objects. For example, here, the university for all of the students is the University of Lisbon. And so that is not unique to each object. Okay? Then here, we are redefining a private field. And so this is what we did with the PIN in the bank account example, right? So this private field should be unique for each student. And so we created the private field out there without any value. And then here we are simply redefining it to the value that is coming into the constructor. Then here, as we already know, is a normal public method. Here we are referencing a private field and also a private method. And so about the private methods, this is how they look like. But as I mentioned, they will probably not yet work in your browser, at least if you're watching this close to the recording date of this course. So as an alternative, you can fake private methods by using the underscore convention instead of the hash. Next up, this is what a getter method looks like. And remember that a getter method is basically so that we can get a value out of an object by simply writing a property instead of writing a method. So in this case, we could simply write student.testscore, and that would then run this getter method. And the same for the setter method. So in this case, we can simply define the test score by setting it to some value instead of calling a test score method. And keep in mind that if you have a setter for a property that is already defined in the constructor, then you need to create basically a new property with the underscore in front of it. So again, that is kind of a convention that you should use in this case. And then in the getter with the same name, you also need to then return that new property. So we did that in one of the lectures when we did a name validation for the name that was passed into the constructor. Remember that? Next, this is how you write static methods. And a static method is available only on the class. So it cannot access the instance properties nor the methods, but only the static ones. So for example, that static public field that we defined there in the top will of course be accessible in the static method. And usually we use these static methods as helper methods for the class. Finally, this is how you then create a new object using the new operator. And so this should be nothing new at this point for you. Now, here is just a couple of things that we need to remember about classes and that I actually already mentioned before as well. So keep in mind that classes are really just syntactic sugar over constructor functions. Also, classes are not hoisted, they are first-class citizens, and the class body is always executed in strict mode. Okay? And there you have it. This is an overview and also a summary of the entire syntax of classes in JavaScript.